A single ripple cuts the black water. In November 1933, a retired hotel manager and his wife see something enormous churn the surface. Within weeks, the world's press descends. Within months, the creature has a name. It becomes the most searched for animal on Earth, a geological scar older than the Atlantic. A glacial trench deeper than the North Sea. A commander recovering from a nervous breakdown interviews 50 witnesses, convinced he has found a living fossil. The perfect photograph that looked exactly like what the world wanted to see. 24 boats sweep the loch with sonar. They find 3 unexplained contacts, larger than any known fish. A scientist arrives as a monster hunter and spends a lifetime studying the water instead. For 90 years, no body, no bone, no definitive proof has ever been found. The question is not simply whether the monster exists, it is why we need her to. Why, in the face of silence and science, does the legend only grow stronger? Because sometimes, the deepest mystery is not in the water, but in the mirror. It begins with water, a vast, dark, silent expanse that seems to swallow the very light. It lies in a valley so deep, so sheer, that the hills on either side feel less like landscape and more like walls. This is a place that feels older than memory, a place where the air itself seems to hold a breath. For centuries, people have come to these shores and felt a presence. They have looked out across the shifting grey surface, and sensed something watching them back from the profound and impenetrable dark. This is Loch Ness, and long before it had a name, the loch was waiting. It is a trench of water, 23 miles long, a mile wide, and so deep it defies everyday understanding. To stand on its shore is to stand at the edge of a submerged canyon. The water is the colour of strong tea, stained by peat washed from the surrounding hills. It does not sparkle, it absorbs. On a calm day, the surface is a perfect dark mirror, reflecting the clouds and the hills in a stillness that feels absolute. On a rough day, it is a cauldron of white-capped waves, as violent and unpredictable as any sea. This is not a gentle lake. It is an inland fjord, a geological wound filled to the brim with cold black water. The story of this place is written not in centuries, but in hundreds of millions of years. Loch Ness does not simply sit in a valley, it occupies a scar. A great diagonal fracture that slashes across the face of Scotland, from the Atlantic coast to the North Sea. This is the Great Glen Fault. It is a crack in the very bones of the continent, so ancient it predates the formation of the Atlantic Ocean itself. For eons, tectonic forces have ground along this line, shifting land masses, shearing rock, and creating a natural weakness in the Earth's crust. Then, roughly 10,000 years ago, the ice came. Glaciers a mile thick, the great grinding engines of the last ice age, flowed down this pre-existing weakness. They did not gently carve a valley, they excavated it. They scoured and plucked and bulldozed, digging down into the fractured rock with unimaginable force. When the world finally warmed and the ice retreated, it left behind a raw, deep trench. And into that trench, water poured. The result is an abyss. The bed of Loch Ness plunges to a maximum depth of 230 meters. To put that into perspective, that is deeper than the North Sea. It is deeper than most of the coastal waters around the British Isles. If you could take the Eiffel Tower and submerge it upright in the loch, only the very tip of its antenna would break the surface. This is not a lake. It is a freshwater ocean trench hidden in the Scottish Highlands. The scale of the loch is the first thing that dismantles a visitor's sense of proportion. It holds more fresh water than all the lakes in England and Wales combined, over 7.5 cubic kilometers of it. This single body of water contains nearly 1/3 of all the fresh surface water in Scotland. You cannot see from one end to the other on most days. The curvature of the earth and the frequent mists see to that. Its surface area is vast, but its true volume is hidden, a secret held in its profound depth. This water has a unique and defining property. It is peat-stained, rich with tannins washed from the surrounding soil. This does more than give it its distinctive amber hue. It acts as a perfect light filter. Sunlight penetrates only a short distance before being completely absorbed. Dive beneath the surface, and you enter a world of fading monochrome. Within a few meters, the world dissolves into a sepia twilight. A few meters further, and you are in absolute ink-black darkness. Visibility is often less than the length of a car. In the deep trenches, it is zero. This simple fact of physics has shaped every single investigation, every search, every claim ever made about Loch Ness. You cannot see into it. Sonar can map its contours, but cannot provide an image. Cameras are blind beyond a few feet of artificial light. The loch guards its secrets in a perpetual, natural gloom. This is not an excuse for the lack of evidence. It is the fundamental condition of all evidence gathered here. Every ambiguous photograph, every unexplained sonar echo, exists first and foremost because the water itself is a veil. For at least 8,000 years, humans have been drawn to this formidable corridor. The Great Glen was not a barrier, it was a highway. Neolithic people, the first farmers, settled on its more sheltered shores. They left behind fragments of pottery, tools, and the ghosts of their homes. They lived with the loch, fished its waters, and looked out across its expanse, the first to wonder what moved in its depths. Then came the Bronze Age peoples. They raised burial cairns on the ridges overlooking the water, placing their dead high above the dark mirror, perhaps to be closer to the sky gods, perhaps to watch over the valley. These mounds still dot the landscape, silent sentinels from an age of metal and myth. The loch was a constant in their world, a feature of both practical life and spiritual geography. But the most enigmatic of the early inhabitants were the Picts, a warrior culture that dominated northern Scotland for centuries before the arrival of the Scots from Ireland. They were known to the Romans as the Painted People, likely for their elaborate tattoos. They left no written records of their own. Their history is told in stone. Across the region, from the coast to the glens, they erected great, rough-hewn slabs and covered them with a mysterious, sophisticated language of symbols. The symbols are a captivating puzzle, mirrors and combs, crescent moons and strange beasts. Among these recurring figures is one that has captured the modern imagination more than any other. It is a creature with a long, curved neck, a small head, a bulbous body, and 2 flippers or fins. Archaeologists call it simply the Pictish beast. It appears on stones from the 6th to the 9th centuries, from the Orkney Islands to the heart of the Great Glen. What does it represent? The debate is fierce and unresolved. Some scholars argue it is a purely abstract symbol, a badge of power or clan identity, with no basis in the natural world. Others suggest it could be a stylized depiction of a known animal, a swimming elephant from a traveller's tale, or a dolphin. But a persistent theory, one that resonates deeply with the later legend, is that it represents a water creature from Pictish mythology, or even a creature they believed lived in their lochs and seas. The stones are silent. They offer no captions. But the presence of this long-necked, flippered figure, carved by people who lived on these very shores centuries before the name Nessie was ever spoken, is a haunting echo. It suggests that the idea of a creature in these waters did not begin with a newspaper report in 1933. It is woven into the oldest fabric of human habitation here. The Picts looked into the same dark water and saw something worthy of immortalizing in stone. The first written account that explicitly mentions a monster in these waters comes from a different world entirely. It is the world of early Christianity, of saints and miracles. The year is 565 AD, according to the Chronicle. The source is the life of Saint Columba, written by the abbot Adamnan, about a century after the events he describes. Columba, the fiery Irish prince turned missionary, had come to the land of the Picts to convert them. His journey brought him to the River Ness, the short, fast-flowing outlet that connects Loch Ness to the sea. Adamnan recounts that Columba and his followers came upon a group of Picts burying a man by the river. They explained that the man had been swimming to retrieve a boat when a water beast attacked him and dragged him under. As they spoke, another man, a follower of Columba named Lugna, impulsively dived into the river to fetch the same boat. The creature, sensing new prey, rose from the depths and rushed toward him, its mouth open. Columba, standing on the bank, raised his hand. He made the sign of the cross and commanded the beast in a powerful voice. "Go no further. Do not touch the man. Return at once." According to Adamnan, the creature halted as if pulled by ropes. It fled in terror, and Lugna returned unharmed. The astonished Picts, witnessing this power, praised the god of Columba. It is a perfect saintly miracle, faith overcoming the primeval monster of the pagan deep. This story has been cited for generations as the founding document of the Loch Ness monster legend, but historians urge caution. Adamnan was not writing a newspaper report. He was writing hagiography, a biography of a saint designed to demonstrate his holiness and divine power. Miraculous encounters with beasts, from dragons to sea serpents, were a standard trope in such texts. Furthermore, the event takes place in the River Ness, not the loch itself. Yet, the geographical and psychological connection is undeniable. For over 1,000 years, this written seed lay dormant, a single data point in the long history of the glen. The landscape itself does not need written stories to breed mystery. It generates its own atmosphere, daily. The Great Glen is a deep, straight cut through the highlands. The hills on either side rise so steeply that they trap weather and create their own microclimate. Mist forms with uncanny ease. It can appear on a still summer morning, rising like steam from the water. It can roll down the mountainsides on an autumn evening, swallowing trees and houses whole. This mist transforms the familiar into the strange. A distant boat becomes a ghostly silhouette. A log near the shore shifts and blurs in the peripheral vision. The far end of the loch disappears entirely, leaving you on an island of visibility in a white, silent world. It is a landscape designed for the imagination, a natural theatre where the mind can easily project shapes and meanings onto the ambiguous. Long before St. Columba, and long after, the oral traditions of the Gaelic-speaking communities around the loch were rich with water spirits. Most potent of all was the each-wish, the water horse. This was no gentle creature. It was a shapeshifter, a predator. It was said to appear on the shore as a beautiful, tame horse, tempting a traveller to mount it. But once on its back, the rider would find his hands stuck fast to the creature's skin. The each-wish would then charge headlong into the loch, diving to the depths where it would devour the rider, leaving only the liver floating to the surface. These stories were not quaint folklore, they were serious warnings about the dangers of the deep, unknown waters. They personified the very real risks of drowning in the cold, sudden storms, or the treacherous currents. The loch was not just water, it was a being with appetite and intent. These tales of the each-wish were widespread across Highland Scotland and Ireland. They represent a genuine ancient folkloric layer that saturates the landscape of Loch Ness centuries before the modern monster was born. They show that people did not just fear what might be in the loch, they understood the loch itself as a living, potentially malevolent entity. The water was not a home for a monster, it was the monster. So, we begin at the water's edge, with a place that commands myth. A geological scar filled by glacial force, a volume of dark water so vast it becomes a character in its own story. A human corridor etched with symbols of mysterious beasts, a saint's legend written onto a river. A landscape that breeds mist and breeds tales of predatory spirits. This is the foundation. This is the loch at the end of the world, as it existed for millennia, deep, dark, and whispering. All it needed was for the modern world to look and to give the whisper a name. The stage was set, the water was waiting. But the phenomenon we know today, the global hunt, the photographs and sonar blips, required a catalyst. It required a moment when the ancient, whispering landscape collided with the machinery of the modern age. That moment would come not from a saint, nor a Pictish carver, nor a Gaelic storyteller. It would come from a road, a newspaper, and a world hungry for wonder in a year of deepening shadows. The year was 1933. The Great Depression gripped the world. King Kong premiered in cinemas, thrilling audiences with the spectacle of a giant beast from a lost world. And in the Scottish Highlands, a new road along the western shore of Loch Ness was finally completed, opening this secluded trench to the age of the motorcar. The world was about to go looking, and it would find exactly what it was searching for. The water is never still. It is a lesson the loch teaches every visitor. A breeze, a current, a sudden squall from the great glen. The surface is a shifting skin of greys and blacks and deep bottle greens. But some disturbances are different. Some movements suggest a force from below, a presence that churns the peat-stained water into something strange, something alive. For centuries, those who lived along these shores knew the loch held secrets. They spoke of water horses and shape-shifting spirits, of something ancient sleeping in the deep. But in the spring of 1933, a single, brief report would transform local folklore into a global obsession. The world was about to turn its gaze upon this lonely stretch of water, and it would never look away. It begins not with a roar, but with a letter. A few paragraphs of careful script, posted to the offices of a local newspaper in Inverness. The writer is John Mackay, a hotel manager from Drumnadrochit. He and his wife were driving home along the new Lochside Road on a quiet afternoon. The date is the 2nd of May. The water was calm. Then, near the village of Abriacan, something broke the silence. A violent churning, a rolling boil of water, as if some enormous creature were thrashing just beneath the surface. It lasted perhaps a minute before subsiding into a long, fading wake. They saw no head, no flippers, no arching neck. Just the water itself, turned suddenly and inexplicably furious. The letter landed on the desk of Alex Campbell. He was more than just the editor of the Inverness Courier. He was also the local water bailiff, a man who knew every inch of the loch, its moods and its mysteries. And he was, by his own later admission, a believer. He had seen something himself years before, a dark, humped shape moving against the wind. Campbell took Mackay's report and crafted it into a story. He gave it a headline that would echo around the world, "Strange Spectacle on Loch Ness." It was a masterful piece of local journalism, understated yet charged with possibility. He reported the facts, but the framing was everything. This was not a natural phenomenon, it was a spectacle. The ripple effect was immediate. Within days, the story was picked up by Scottish national papers. Within weeks, the London press had dispatched correspondents north. They arrived by train to Inverness, then hired cars or took buses along the glen, their notebooks ready. The quiet Highland Loch was now a dateline. The reports they filed were a mixture of breathless speculation and sober interviews with other locals who now, emboldened, came forward with their own tales. A monster had been born not from the water, but from the printing press. The modern legend of Nessie was, from its very first breath, a media event. The timing was perfect. Or perhaps, for a skeptic, perfectly suspicious. The year was 1933. The world was in the grip of the Great Depression. Economic anxiety hung like a pall. In Germany, the Nazis had just seized full power. In America, prohibition was ending amid gangland violence. The public appetite for distraction, for wonder, for escape was bottomless. And in cinemas that very year, audiences were thrilling to a new kind of spectacle: King Kong. The giant ape, captured from a lost world, was terrifying and thrilling audiences. The line between fantasy and front-page news had never been so enticingly blurred. Newspaper editors, especially those of the popular dailies in London, understood this hunger perfectly. The summer silly season was approaching, that traditional lull in hard news when circulations often dipped. A sea monster in a remote Scottish loch was the ideal story to fill column inches and sell papers. It was harmless, thrilling, and utterly unverifiable. It invited readers to dream. The Loch Ness monster became a cultural phenomenon long before it was ever considered a zoological one. It was a story that answered a deep, collective need for mystery in a world that felt increasingly grim and predictable. And there was another, more practical reason why 1933 became the year. It was a reason made of tarmac and gravel. For centuries, Loch Ness had been largely inaccessible. The steep, wooded slopes of the Great Glen made travel along its shores a difficult trek. But that year, the final sections of the A82 road were completed. For the first time in history, the entire western shore of the loch was open to motor traffic. Suddenly, hundreds of new vantage points existed. Where once only shepherds or fishermen might glimpse the water, now any tourist, any salesman, any family on a motoring holiday could pull over and look. This was a revolution in perception. The loch was now framed by a windscreen. Sightings began to come from motorists, people in motion, glimpsing something for a few seconds as they rounded a bend. The phenomenon of the car witness was born. Their accounts often shared a similar structure: a sudden, startling glimpse of something dark and moving, a frantic stop, a fumbled search for a camera, and then, nothing but empty water. The road did not create the monster, but it created the conditions for the modern sighting. It turned the loch from a private wilderness into a public spectacle. The stage was set. The press was hungry. The public was enthralled. And into this fervour stepped a man who seemed, at first, to be the perfect hero for the story. His name was Marmaduke Wetherell. A big game hunter of some renown, he had tracked lions in Africa and written about his exploits. In December of 1933, the Daily Mail, eager to secure a scoop, hired him. They sent him north with a simple, sensational brief: find the monster. Wetherell, ever the showman, embraced the role. He arrived at the loch with great fanfare, promising results, and remarkably, he delivered. Within days, Wetherell announced a monumental discovery. On the soft, muddy shore near the village of Dorez, he had found footprints, enormous footprints. They led from the water's edge into the trees. He made plaster casts of them, and the Daily Mail splashed the story: Monster of Loch is not a legend but a fact. The casts were sent to London for analysis at the Natural History Museum. The conclusion, when it came, was a masterpiece of dry, scientific humiliation. The prints had not been made by a living creature. They had been made by a dried hippopotamus foot, the kind used as an umbrella stand or ashtray in fashionable Edwardian homes. Wetherell was utterly discredited. The Daily Mail, embarrassed, dropped him and the story. He retreated from public view, a laughingstock. But the hunter's pride was wounded, and a desire for revenge against the newspaper that had humiliated him, and perhaps against a public so eager to believe, simmered. His connection to the most famous image in the entire Nessie saga, the photograph that would define the creature for generations, would remain a secret for 6 decades. The hoax of the hippo foot was a public fiasco. The hoax to come was a private, meticulous work of art. The Loch, meanwhile, did not fade from the headlines. The following spring, in April of 1934, the Daily Mail had another chance to redeem itself. It received a photograph so compelling, so perfectly composed, that it seemed to erase all prior doubt. The image showed the Loch on a calm day. In the center of the frame, rising from the inky water, was a long, slender neck, topped with a small, dinosaur-like head. It was exactly what the world imagined. It was the plesiosaur made real. The photographer was a respected London gynecologist named Robert Kenneth Wilson. His credentials lent the image an air of unimpeachable authority. Wilson's story was simple and believable. He was on a motoring holiday with a friend. They had stopped on the northern shore near Invermoriston to take in the view. Wilson saw a disturbance in the water, grabbed his camera, and took 4 quick shots. Only 2 exposures came out clearly. He was reluctant to get involved, he said, but felt the evidence was too important to suppress. He sold the pictures to the Daily Mail on the condition his name not be used. Thus, it became known forever as the surgeon's photograph. It was scientific, it was sober, and it was sensational. For 60 years, this single image was the cornerstone of the legend. It was reproduced in every book, every article, every documentary. It was the proof. It shaped how millions of people visualized Nessie. The long neck, the small head, it cemented the popular link to prehistoric survivors. It was a perfect cultural object because it matched the existing fantasy so precisely. It asked the public to believe, and they did, because they wanted to. The photograph did not just capture an image, it captured an imagination. But the truth, when it finally surfaced, was both absurd and deeply human. The investigation was pieced together by researcher David Martin and journalist Alistair Boyd. Their search led them to an elderly man named Christian Sperling, living in a quiet English village. On his deathbed in 1994, Sperling confessed. He was Wetherell's stepson. The humiliated big-game hunter had plotted his revenge. He enlisted his son, Ian, and Sperling, who was a skilled model maker. The monster was a mere 14 inches tall. Sperling sculpted a head and neck from plastic wood and attached it to a toy submarine purchased from Woolworths for a few shillings. The staging was careful. They chose a bay near Drumnadrochit, where the water was deep and dark. On a calm day, they launched the little submarine, its clockwork motor propelling it in a slow circle. The ripples it created looked, in photograph, like the wake of a much larger body. Ian Wetherell took the pictures. But they needed a credible source to sell them. They turned to Robert Wilson, a friend of the family. He agreed to lend his name and his respectable profession to the endeavour. The surgeon was not the photographer, he was the front man. The great proof was a schoolboy prank, amplified by a grudge and a desire for credibility. The exposure of the hoax was global news, yet, in a pattern that would become familiar, it did not kill the legend. For many, the surgeon's photograph remained real. Conspiracy theories sprouted. Sperling was lying. The confession was the real hoax. The model was a test, and Wilson had photographed the real creature by chance. The image had embedded itself so deeply in the cultural psyche that disproof was simply rejected. The photograph was a perfect mirror. It showed the world not a monster, but its own powerful, stubborn desire to believe in one. The year the world went looking, 1933, set a template that has never been broken. It began with a ripple in the water, reported by ordinary people. It was amplified by a media machine hungry for wonder. It was shaped by new technology, the motor car that changed how, and it was immediately vulnerable to hoaxers who understood that desire all too well. The search had begun not as a scientific inquiry, but as a drama. And with the stage now crowded with reporters, hunters, and pranksters, a new kind of character was about to enter from the wings. Not a showman, but a scholar. Not a hunter of headlines, but a hunter of facts. The age of the true believer, the investigator who would bring method to the madness, was dawning. The monster had its myth. Now, it would get its first detective. The water is never still. Even on the calmest day, a breath moves across Loch Ness, a ripple, a suggestion. It is a surface that invites projection, a dark mirror waiting for a shape to be drawn upon it. For centuries, that shape lived only in local lore, a kelpie's whisper from the peat-stained deep. But in the wake of the 1933 sightings, the mirror cracked. The world was now looking, and it demanded more than stories. It demanded evidence. It demanded hunters. And so they came, a procession of men drawn to the loch's enigmatic shores, each armed with their own tools, a notebook, a camera, a sonar transducer, or simply a desperate need to believe. They would transform a local oddity into a global puzzle, building a legend not from a single monster, but from the accumulated weight of 1,000 searches. They arrived with questions, and they left with more. The first of them came not as a scientist, but as a collector of mysteries. In the autumn of 1933, a retired Royal Navy commander named Rupert Gould stepped off the train at Inverness. He was a man of precise intellect, a horologist who restored antique clocks for the British Museum. But his mind was also a repository for the anomalous, for sea serpents and unexplained sounds. He carried with him the scars of a nervous breakdown, a fragility that perhaps made him more receptive to the testimonies of others. The loch, in its vast silence, offered a new mechanism to understand, a puzzle to reassemble from scattered reports. Gould did not come to scoff. He came to listen. For months he traversed the loch side, knocking on farmhouse doors, tracking down motorists, taking statements from gamekeepers and housewives. He compiled over 50 eyewitness accounts, each one a fragment of a possible whole. He mapped their sightings, noting times, weather conditions, and the precise stretch of water. His approach was methodical, naval. He was building a case, witness by witness, cross-referencing details to filter out hoaxes and mistakes. In 1934, he published his findings in a book titled The Loch Ness Monster and Others. It was a landmark. This slim volume established the entire template for the decades of investigation that would follow. Here was the systematic collection of testimony, the attempt to find patterns in the chaos of human perception. Gould concluded that something real was in the loch. He dismissed the idea of a giant eel or a sturgeon. The descriptions of a long neck and a bulky body pointed him instead to a surviving plesiosaur, or perhaps a long-necked seal. His work did not prove the monster's existence, but it granted the phenomenon a new legitimacy. It was no longer just a newspaper story. It was a mystery worthy of serious inquiry. Gould had turned anecdote into data, and in doing so he passed a baton. The hunt was now formalized. The next hunter arrived with a different tool. He was not a collector of stories, but a recorder of images. Tim Dinsdale was an aeronautical engineer, a man trained to observe and analyze motion. On the afternoon of April 23, 1960, he stood on a hillside near Foyers on the loch's southern shore. He had been camping for days, his camera loaded with film. Then he saw it, a dark, reddish-brown hump, moving with purpose against the wind. For 4 minutes he filmed as it traversed the water, then turned and submerged. Dinsdale was convinced. He had captured the creature. The footage, just over 4 minutes of grainy black and white film, became a sensation. It showed a distinct oval shape leaving a V-shaped wake. It moved, it turned, it vanished. To the naked eye, it was compelling. But the eye is easily fooled. Skeptics immediately argued it was a boat, perhaps the Scott II, a known research vessel on the loch. The debate raged in newspapers and pubs. To settle it, the film was submitted in 1966 to the most rigorous photographic analysts in Britain, the Joint Air Reconnaissance Intelligence Centre, or JARIC. This was the RAF's Cold War unit, experts in scrutinizing spy plane footage of Soviet installations. Their conclusions sent a shockwave through the skeptical community. After meticulous frame-by-frame analysis, JARIC stated the object was probably animate. They estimated its length at 12 to 16 feet, its speed at 10 miles per hour. It was not, in their professional opinion, a boat. The Dinsdale film was suddenly the most credible piece of evidence in the monster's history. It was technical, it was analysed by impartial experts, and it pointed to something unknown. Yet the doubt never fully dissolved. Enhancements decades later suggested the object's size might have been overestimated. The debate embodies the entire Nessie saga, a piece of evidence just clear enough to inspire belief, just ambiguous enough to sustain doubt. If Gould organised the stories and Dinsdale captured the moving image, the next phase was about sustained, collective vigilance. The monster needed an institution. In 1962, it got one. The Loch Ness Investigation Bureau was founded, launching the most systematic, organised watch the Loch would ever see. For a decade, from 1962 to 1972, the LNIB turned monster hunting into a summer ritual. Volunteers from across Britain and Europe, students, teachers, enthusiasts, manned camera stations and observation posts around the loch's perimeter. They lived in caravans and tents, scanning the water in shifts, day after day, week after week. It was a monumental exercise in citizen science, long before the term was coined. The Bureau's greatest legacy was not a photograph, but a culture. It created a methodology, the logbook. Every glint, every ripple, every curious wake was noted with time, location, and weather. They amassed volumes of data, recording hundreds of unexplained surface disturbances. They proved that strange things did happen on the loch with surprising frequency. They also proved how rarely those events coincided with a loaded camera pointed in the right direction. The LNIB produced no definitive evidence, but it generated something perhaps more powerful, a community of belief built on shared purpose and meticulous record-keeping. The baton of investigation was passing again, this time across the Atlantic. The new hunter brought technology of a different magnitude. Robert Rines was an American patent attorney, a lawyer, and an inventor. He approached Loch Ness not as a folklore enthusiast, but as an engineering problem. In the early 1970s, he arrived with a formidable arsenal, high-resolution sonar and underwater strobe cameras. His idea was to create a trap. He would suspend cameras and sonar transducers from a boat, creating an invisible zone in the deep. When something large passed through the sonar beam, it would trigger. In 1972, the trap sprung. Sonar recorded large, moving targets, and a camera fired. The resulting photograph, after being sent to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California for computer enhancement, caused a global sensation. It appeared to show a large, diamond-shaped flipper covered in rough, tubercle-like skin. In 1975, another enhanced image seemed to show a gargoyle-like head and neck. Most astonishingly, the flipper photograph was published in Nature, one of the world's most prestigious scientific journals. For a moment, the Loch Ness Monster had entered the hallowed halls of peer-reviewed science. Rines had achieved what no one else had, evidence that seemed both technological and scientific. He spent the rest of his life, and a considerable fortune, returning to the Loch, refining his equipment, forever chasing the definitive proof. He died in 2009, a true believer to the end, yet his evidence too would become mired in controversy. Critics argued the computer enhancement process, revolutionary for its time, had actually created detail that wasn't in the original image. The flipper could be a decaying log, a sediment cloud, a trick of light and shadow. The nature paper had been cautious, but the world saw confirmation. Rines' story is a poignant one, the triumph of technology yielding only deeper ambiguity. But for every disciplined investigator drawn to the Loch's mystery, there was another drawn to the glare of its spotlight. If the hunt attracted its scientists and engineers, it also attracted its performers. In 1969, a former soldier named Frank Searle arrived at Loch Ness. He pitched a tent on the shore and declared himself an independent investigator. Searle was a character of a different stripe, brash, confrontational, and prolific with a camera. Throughout the 1970s, he produced a stream of photographs that were, for a time, widely published. They showed clear, dramatic images of a long neck and head rising from the water. The problem was the clarity. In a phenomenon defined by blurry shapes and distant humps, Searle's photos were suspiciously sharp. Slowly, the truth emerged. Investigators found the source material, illustrations of dinosaurs from children's books. Searle had cut them out, placed them on a stick, and photographed them against the Loch's surface. His entire portfolio was an elaborate, clumsy hoax. When confronted, he became hostile, a figure of ridicule and anger. Searle's story is a vital, darker thread in the tapestry. He represents the legend's power to confer identity and purpose, to turn a lonely man into a local celebrity, if only a notorious one. The hunters, the hoaxers, and the true believers. They are all part of the same ecosystem. Gould sought order in testimony. Dinsdale sought truth in film. The LNIB sought proof through endurance. Rines sought revelation through technology. Searle sought fame through fabrication. Each, in their way, added a layer to the myth. They built an archive of maybe and what if, a mountain of data that never quite coalesced into a body. They turned the Loch from a location into a laboratory, a stage, and a shrine. Their collective efforts did not solve the mystery. Instead, they deepened it, ensuring that the question would outlive them all. As the 1970s drew to a close, this first great age of the hunt was ending. The citizen watches, the sonar blips, the enhanced photographs. They had taken the legend as far as optics and acoustics could go. A new question was beginning to form, one less about the hunters and their tools, and more about the hunted environment itself. If the accumulated evidence pointed to anything, it pointed away from prehistoric survivors and towards the Loch's own living reality. The next chapter would not look for monsters in the dark. It would ask what actually lives there, in the cold, profound deep, and whether nature, in its own mundane wonder, could be strange enough to explain the myth. The search was turning inwards, from the surface to the ecosystem, from the extraordinary to the real. The surface of Loch Ness is a story we tell ourselves. It is a story of wakes and waves, of fleeting glimpses and the sudden, heart-stopping rupture of the ordinary. But the real story, the oldest story, is written in the dark. It is a story of cold and pressure, of a world that swallows light and holds its secrets close. For centuries, we have projected our monsters onto that black mirror. But to understand what might live there, we must first listen to what actually does. We must descend into a realm defined not by myth, but by geology, by chemistry, by the slow, blind pulse of life adapted to an abyss. This is not a typical lake. It is an inland sea, a freshwater trench carved by ice and isolated by time. The water is cold, just a few degrees above freezing at its deepest reaches. It is stained the color of strong tea by peat, a natural tannin that acts like a photographic filter, absorbing the red and yellow wavelengths of sunlight until only a ghostly green twilight remains. Below 30 meters, that too vanishes. The world becomes a realm of touch and vibration, of senses we can scarcely imagine. This combination, profound depth, perpetual cold, and utter darkness, has crafted an ecosystem that is both sparse and strangely potent. The food web here is built on a paradox. The peat-stained water limits photosynthesis, restricting the growth of algae and plankton near the surface. The foundation of the loch's ecology is therefore thin, a meager trickle of energy from the sun. And yet, in the deep, cold stillness, that energy is conserved with miserly efficiency. Life here moves slowly, grows slowly, and can, under the right conditions, grow very, very large. The creatures that thrive are relics and survivors, species shaped by the ice age that have found in this deep, dark trench a perfect refuge from a changed world. One of the most ancient residents is the Arctic char. This is a glacial relic, a fish left behind when the ice sheets retreated 10,000 years ago. Isolated in the cold depths of Loch Ness, these char have evolved into a unique population. They are living fossils, cruising the dark slopes, their life cycle timed to the slow turn of seasons in a world with no summer sun. They share the depths with brown trout, and the occasional Atlantic salmon running through from the River Ness. There are pike, ambush predators lurking in the shallower bays. But one creature stands out, not for its rarity, but for its mystery and its potential for startling scale, the European eel. The eel population in Loch Ness is extraordinary. In the cold, food-rich depths, freed from some constraints of warmer, more crowded waters, eels can achieve remarkable sizes. While most river eels might reach a meter in length, the deep, cold larder of Loch Ness offers the possibility of something more. Some researchers speculate that individuals could grow to 2, even 3 meters long. In the darkness, with limitless time and ample prey, an eel could become a leviathan. But to understand why this matters, we must first understand the eel itself, for it is one of nature's most profound enigmas. The life cycle of the European eel is a saga that dwarfs most myths. It begins and ends in the Sargasso Sea, a vast, calm region in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. There, in depths we have never fully observed, the eels breed and die. Their larvae, like transparent willow leaves, then embark on an impossible journey. They drift on ocean currents for 2, sometimes 3 years, crossing thousands of miles of open Atlantic. Those that survive approach the European coast, transform into tiny glass-like elvers, and begin their ascent into fresh water. They enter rivers and streams, including the River Ness. They migrate upstream, a silent, determined invasion. And then they disappear. For decades, these eels live in the fresh water of Loch Ness. They are nocturnal, secretive, and supremely adaptable. They grow, they hunt, they become part of the fabric of the deep. Then, after 20, 30, perhaps 50 years, an ancient signal triggers a final, irreversible change. They stop feeding, their eyes enlarge, their bodies turn silver, and they begin the long journey back. They navigate down the River Ness, through the Moray Firth and into the Atlantic, swimming thousands of miles to the very spot where they were born, to spawn and complete a circle we are only beginning to map. In an enclosed, deep environment like Loch Ness, this lengthy freshwater phase is the key. An eel with ample food and few predators has one biological imperative: grow. It is a long, lean, muscular predator, perfectly designed for life in dark water. Now, imagine such a creature not of 1 meter, but of 2 or 3. Imagine it swimming not at the surface but just below it, its back breaking the water in a series of humps. Imagine it seen from a distance, from a hillside or a car window, through the haze of a Loch Ness morning. The description that often emerges is not of a fish, but of something else, a long, sinuous, serpentine form moving with purpose through the water. This is not a new idea. For decades, naturalists have proposed that very large eels could account for a significant number of sightings, particularly those describing a long, coiled neck or a series of undulating humps. The anatomy fits, the behavior fits, the environment certainly supports it. But where is the proof? Where is the giant eel carcass, the definitive photograph? The answer may lie not in a single monster, but in a population of exceptionally large but otherwise ordinary animals. The mystery shifts from the zoologically impossible to the ecologically extraordinary. In 2019, a team of researchers from the University of Otago in New Zealand arrived with a new kind of net. They did not drag hooks or cameras through the deep. Instead, they cast a genetic net. They conducted an environmental DNA survey of Loch Ness. Every creature sheds genetic material, scales, skin cells, waste into its environment. By filtering and analyzing hundreds of water samples from across the loch and at every depth, they could build a census of life, a genetic inventory of everything calling the loch home. The results were revelatory. They detected over 5,000 species, from bacteria to birds. They found abundant DNA from Arctic char, from salmon, from trout, and they found a tremendous amount of eel DNA. What they did not find was any trace of DNA from a large, unknown reptile, no plesiosaur. No long-necked survivor from the age of dinosaurs. The most romantic and persistent explanation for the Loch Ness monster was, at the genetic level, absent. The sheer volume of eel DNA, however, was a striking data point. The lead researcher, Professor Neil Gemmell, was cautious. He stated the findings were consistent with the presence of a large population of eels. He did not, and could not, say that a giant eel was the monster, but the science had quietly shifted the weight of probability. The mythical beast was receding, and a biological reality was coming into focus: the plesiosaur. It is the image that has defined Nessie in the global imagination. The long, swan-like neck, the small head, the bulky body with 4 powerful flippers. It is a perfect icon, a prehistoric monster surviving into the modern age. It is also, according to every paleontologist who has considered the question, an absolute impossibility. The reasons are not mere skepticism. They're grounded in the unforgiving logic of geology, biology, and deep time. First, plesiosaurs were air-breathing reptiles. Like whales or seals, they would need to surface regularly to breathe. A breeding population would need to surface constantly, making them a common, daily sight, not a rare mystery. Second, Loch Ness is a young feature. It was carved by glaciers a mere 10,000 years ago. During the last ice age, this entire landscape was buried under miles of solid ice. The loch itself was a frozen tomb. Nothing could have survived that. The idea of a prehistoric relic surviving from before the glaciers is a geological fantasy. The loch was empty, then it filled with water. Every creature in it today arrived after the ice melted, either by swimming, flying, or being carried. There was no ancient sanctuary here. Third, and most definitively, the fossil record is clear. Plesiosaurs, along with all the other non-avian dinosaurs, were wiped out in the cataclysm that ended the Cretaceous period 66 million years ago. There is no credible evidence, not a single bone or tooth, to suggest any species of plesiosaur survived that global extinction event. 66 million years is an abyss of time so vast that the continents themselves have drifted into new configurations. The persistence of the plesiosaur idea tells us nothing about Loch Ness, but everything about us. It is a narrative we cling to because it is grand, romantic, and irresistibly thrilling. So if not a plesiosaur, what else could stir the waters and stir the imagination? The list of plausible candidates is a catalogue of the large, the unexpected, and the misunderstood. Take the Wells catfish, a behemoth introduced to some British waters from Europe. It can grow over 2 meters long and weigh more than a man. When these bottom feeders herd fish to the surface or engage in violent mating chases, they can create a tremendous thrashing commotion that from a distance could be mistaken for a monstrous struggle. Could a marine visitor ever enter the loch? The Greenland shark, a slow-moving giant of the Arctic depths, can reach 6 meters in length. It is known to inhabit cold, deep Scottish sea lochs. Could one occasionally wander up the River Ness? The journey is theoretically possible, though the shallow, rocky river would be a formidable barrier. An otter family swimming in a line can create a convincing string of humps. A red deer swimming across a narrow part of the loch will show only head, neck, and antlers, the classic silhouette. Even the loch itself can play tricks. As a seismic gas release from the ancient fault line beneath, a large bubble of methane or carbon dioxide rising and bursting at the surface can mimic the plunge of a large animal. Each of these phenomena has likely been responsible for some sightings. A floating log, weathered and waterlogged, can sit low in the water, appearing and disappearing with the waves. A diving cormorant can leave a wake that resembles something swimming just below. The human mind, especially when primed by expectation and faced with the loch's vast, ambiguous canvas, is a master of interpretation. It seeks pattern, it seeks agency. In the flicker between a wave and a wake, it can conjure a monster from a mirage. But the 2019 Environmental DNA Survey asked a more fundamental question, not what might be misperceived, but what is actually, genetically, present. This survey deserves its status as a landmark. It was forensic ecology. The team collected 250 water samples in a precise grid across the loch's entire length and breadth, and from multiple depths. They filtered out the genetic material and sequenced it, comparing the results to global databases that contain the genetic signatures of every known species. It was a silent, all-seeing census. They found DNA from dogs and sheep, from people and birds, all washed in from the surrounding land. They found the expected fish, char, trout, salmon, eel. They found no trace of reptilian DNA, no shark DNA. No sturgeon DNA, another proposed candidate. The sheer abundance of eel DNA was the standout result. Professor Gemmell was meticulous in his interpretation. Environmental DNA cannot tell you the size of an organism, only its presence. A 1-meter eel and a 3-meter eel shed genetically identical material. The survey could not detect an animal that was not in the sampled area during the brief window of sampling. But what it could do was rule out entire categories of creatures. It closed doors. The data was consistent with a large population of European eels. It was inconsistent with a population of large, unknown reptiles. The monster, as traditionally imagined, was not in the data. Science, at its best, does not provide fairy tale endings. It replaces grand mysteries with smaller, more intricate, and often more beautiful truths. The mystery of Loch Ness is being refined, not solved. It is transforming from a question of paleontology into a question of ecology. From, is there a monster? To, what are the limits of life in this extraordinary place? The search for a solitary anomaly is giving way to a reverence for the system itself, a cold, dark, deep world that can nurture giants of a more plausible, but no less wondrous, kind. We are left not with a void, but with a different kind of depth. The loch's true monster may not be a singular beast, but the sum of its shadows, the giant eel, the rolling catfish, the seismic gasp, the trick of the light, and the unwavering human need for wonder. These elements intertwine in the peat-stained water, creating a legend that is, in the end, bigger than any animal. It is a story we have built together, a reflection of our own longing for a world where the unknown still swims in the deep. And as we turn from the biology of the loch, we must confront the most powerful artifact of that longing, an image. For in 1934, a photograph was taken that would eclipse all eyewitness accounts, a picture so perfect it would convince the world for 60 years that it was finally looking into the eyes of the past. Ass. The water is a mirror, but it is a mirror that lies. It reflects the sky, the mountains, the pines, but it also reflects something deeper, our own expectations. For centuries, Loch Ness has been a surface upon which we project our oldest stories, our fears of the deep, our longing for a world still wild and unknown. And then, in the 20th century, we gave it a new kind of mirror. This technology promised objectivity, a mechanical eye that could not lie, that could capture truth and pin it to paper. But what happens when the deepest human need to believe meets the fragile truth of a photograph? The story of the Loch Ness monster is, in many ways, the story of the image. It is a tale of one picture that shaped a global legend for 6 decades, and of its dramatic, humiliating collapse. It is a chronicle of blurry shapes and brilliant fakes, of dark water and darker doubts. This is the history of seeing, and of being desperately, wonderfully deceived. The legend had been building for years on a foundation of word of mouth, newspaper reports, and eager speculation. But a legend needs an icon. It needs a face. That face arrived in April of 1934, published in the Daily Mail, credited to a respected London surgeon, Colonel Robert Wilson. It showed a long, slender neck rising from the placid, dark water of Loch Ness, a small head turned slightly, the wake of something substantial moving just beneath the surface. It was not a dramatic action shot. It was quiet, almost serene, and it was perfect. It looked precisely like what the world had already decided the monster must be, a surviving prehistoric reptile, a plesiosaur from a lost age. The image did not challenge the narrative, it completed it. Here was the visual proof, elegant in its simplicity, that matched the stories and the sketches and the desperate hopes. The surgeon's photograph, as it became known, was instantly authoritative. The source was impeccable, a medical man, a professional, a figure of trust. The composition was unassuming, lacking the theatricality of a hoax. It presented itself as a snapshot of a fleeting moment, a lucky capture. For the public, and for a burgeoning community of believers, the debate was over. The creature existed, and this was its portrait. The photograph was reproduced in textbooks, encyclopedias, and newspapers around the globe. It became the definitive image of Nessie, the single piece of evidence that could be pointed to when skeptics scoffed. It was a fossil brought to life, not from rock, but from silver nitrate and gelatin. But why did this particular image resonate with such profound and lasting power? The answer lies not in the loch, but in the human mind. This is confirmation bias, the psychological tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmation of one's existing beliefs. The plesiosaur theory, though scientifically fraught, was already the most popular and romantic explanation. The photograph arrived as a gift-wrapped validation. Its long neck and small head were a perfect match for the fossil reconstructions in natural history museums. The dark, rippled water provided just enough ambiguity to feel authentic. The image was accepted not because it was subjected to rigorous forensic analysis. It wasn't, but because it fit the story already being told. It was the missing puzzle piece that everyone had been hoping to find. For 60 years, the surgeon's photograph was the cornerstone of the legend's visual culture. It was unassailable. To question it was to question the integrity of a gentleman, the objectivity of photography, and the hopes of millions. It created a feedback loop. The photograph proved the monster was a plesiosaur, and the plesiosaur theory made the photograph make sense. Investigators built expeditions upon its premise. Artists used it as a reference. The world knew what it was looking for because it had already seen it. The image became more real than the loch itself, a symbol stamped on the global consciousness. It was a truth held in a frame. Yet, beneath that serene surface, a very different story was churning. It was a story of revenge, humiliation, and a child's toy. The truth began to seep out in 1975, in an interview given by a man named Ian Wetherell. His father, Marmaduke, was a big game hunter hired by the Daily Mail in 1933 to find the monster. His search culminated not in triumph, but in ridicule. He claimed to have found the creature's footprints on the loch shore. Plaster casts were made, headlines were written, and then the truth emerged. The tracks had been made with a dried hippopotamus foot, likely an ashtray or umbrella stand. The Daily Mail publicly dismissed Wetherell, who returned to London a humiliated man, and he wanted payback. According to his son, the embittered Wetherell concocted a plan. He would give the newspaper the monster they so desperately wanted. He enlisted his stepson, Christian Sperling, a skilled model maker. Sperling, then in his early 20s, fashioned a head and neck about a foot tall from plastic wood, a modelling compound. He attached this sculpture to the conning tower of a clockwork toy submarine, purchased from a Woolworths store for a few shillings. The entire model was less than 18 inches long. The conspirators, Wetherell, his son Ian, and a friend named Maurice Chambers, then needed a credible photographer. They turned to Robert Wilson, the surgeon, a friend of Chambers. Wilson's involvement remains ambiguous. He may have been a willing participant in the joke, or he may have been duped into taking the picture, believing he was helping friends with a prank on the press. The stage was set. In a quiet bay near the village of Drumnadrochit, they launched their miniature monster. The water was calm. Ian Wetherell wound the clockwork mechanism and set the submarine sailing. Robert Wilson, camera in hand, captured a few frames as it made its voyage. The chosen photograph showed the tiny model from a low angle, with the vast, dark expanse of the loch behind it. The scale was an illusion, a trick of perspective. The ripples in the water were real, but they were made by a toy. The most famous monster in the world was, in that moment, a few inches of sculpted putty chugging through the shallows. The secret held for decades, a private joke among a dwindling few. Then, in the early 1990s, researchers David Martin and Alistair Boyd, who had long been troubled by inconsistencies in the surgeon's photograph, pieced together the story. They tracked down Christian Sperling, then a 90-year-old man living in England. In 1994, he provided a full, signed confession, corroborating Ian Wetherell's earlier account in precise detail. He described the materials, the toy submarine, the location. The hoax was exposed, and the icon was shattered. The photograph that had launched 1,000 expeditions was the product of a petty grudge and a few shillings worth of hobbyist materials. The revelation was a global sensation. Newspapers that had once heralded the image now trumpeted its downfall. It was a profound embarrassment for the legend. But then, something remarkable happened. The legend did not die. It adapted. Almost immediately, a counter-narrative emerged from within the believer community. Perhaps Sperling was lying to protect someone else's reputation. Perhaps his confession was itself an elaborate hoax. Maybe, some argued, there had been a real creature in the loch that day, and Wetherell had simply staged his model to photograph alongside it, and Wilson had accidentally captured the real thing. The details of the exposure were picked apart, reinterpreted, and woven into new, more complex conspiracy theories. This response is one of the most psychologically revealing aspects of the entire Nessie phenomenon. It demonstrates the concept of unfalsifiability. A belief is unfalsifiable when no amount of contrary evidence can definitively disprove it in the eyes of its holders. The evidence is always explained away, reinterpreted, or deemed part of a cover-up. The surgeon's photograph had been the strongest proof. Its destruction should have been a fatal blow. Instead, the legend absorbed the blow and transformed it. The hoax exposure became just another layer in the mystery, a test of faith for true believers. It proved not that the monster wasn't real, but that powerful forces might be trying to make people think it wasn't. The core belief emerged scarred, but intact. The story of the surgeon's photograph is the most famous, but it is only one frame in a long, blurry film strip of visual evidence. The very first photograph emerged in 1933, taken by a man named Hugh Gray. It is a smudge, a blur of white on dark water, taken with a simple camera. Some see a monstrous body with flippers. Others see a Labrador retriever swimming with a stick in its mouth. Still others see a large salmon rolling at the surface. The ambiguity is total. It is a Rorschach test in photographic form, revealing nothing about the loch and everything about the viewer. In 1960, a fireman named Peter O'Connor claimed a dramatic close encounter, producing a photograph that appeared to show a dark, humped back and a thick neck breaking the water. His story was compelling, but the image was not. Analysts quickly noted the water appeared suspiciously shallow, and the texture of the creature matched that of a makeshift pontoon or a weighted bag. It was a crude fabrication, quickly dismissed by all but the most ardent. Then, in 1977, came the photographs of Anthony Shields, taken at Urquhart Bay. They were stunning. They showed a long, graceful neck rising from the water, a small head, in perfect profile. They looked, in fact, like an artist's idealized rendition of the surgeon's photograph, and that was their downfall. They were too good, too clear, too perfectly composed. Shields, a self-described psychic and artist, had created images so visually satisfying that they were instantly suspect and widely dismissed as skillful fakes. This pattern forms the strange, paradoxical heart of the visual evidence for the Loch Ness monster. The genuine photographs, the ones not deliberately faked, are universally ambiguous. They are distant, blurry, and inconclusive. They show wakes without causes, shadows without forms, disturbances without explanation. They are fragments of mystery. Conversely, every photograph that is clear, detailed, and visually definitive has, upon investigation, been exposed as a fabrication. The fakes are convincing, the authentic records are baffling. This is not a coincidence. It is a direct reflection of the monster's true habitat. The monster does not live in the deep, dark water of Loch Ness. It lives in the liminal space between seeing and not seeing, between proof and doubt. It thrives in low visibility, in the corner of the eye, in the interpretation of a blur. A clear photograph kills the mystery. It pins the creature down, defines its edges, makes it finite. A fake photograph, however, feeds the mystery by providing a tantalizing, perfect image that ultimately retreats back into the realm of deception, leaving the core question unanswered. The ambiguous photograph is the most powerful of all, for it invites the imagination to complete the picture. It is an empty vessel into which we pour our myths. The history of Nessie photography is, therefore, a history of a profound human desire, the desire for the image to tell the truth. We vest photographs with an authority they do not inherently possess. We forget they are frames, interpretations, moments isolated from context. They can lie by omission, by angle, by forgery, or simply by the boundless capacity of the human mind to see patterns in chaos. Loch Ness, with its peat-stained water that swallows light and its vast moody expanse, is the perfect collaborator in this deception. It provides the ultimate ambiguous canvas. The exposure of the surgeon's photograph did not end the search, it merely changed its tools. If the human eye could be fooled, and the hunt would move from the surface to the depths, from light to sound. The age of the photograph, with its intimate deceits and powerful icons, was passing. A new age was dawning, an age of silicon and sonar, of pulses of sound sent into the abyss, promising a different kind of truth, one that could not be sculpted from plastic wood or wound up with a key. The search would become electronic, systematic, and profoundly serious. The legend had survived its greatest humiliation. Now, it would face its most rigorous test. The story leaves the sunlit world of pictures and enters the dark, silent world of sound. It is a world of echoes and shadows, where shapes are drawn not by light, but by mathematics. The next chapter would be written not by amateur photographers on the shore, but by scientists in boats, their screens glowing with phantom returns from the deep. This was the beginning of Operation Deepscan, and the dawn of the technological age in the hunt for the impossible. Now, it was the turn of the machine. The loch holds its secrets in the dark. For centuries, the only way to probe its depths was with a weighted line, a crude measure of an abyss that swallowed light and hope in equal measure. Then came a new sense, a sense that could see in the dark, a sound that could travel through the peat-stained water and return with an echo, a shape, a ghost of something solid in the void. The age of eyewitness testimony was giving way to the age of the machine, the age of the echo. This was a new kind of hunt, no longer reliant on the fleeting glimpse or the shaky camera, but on the cold, precise language of physics and electronics. It promised objectivity. It promised proof. It would reveal that the deepest mystery of Loch Ness was not what might live within it, but how we choose to interpret the shadows our own technology casts back at us. The story of this technological quest is a chronicle of escalating ambition, each expedition armed with more sophisticated ears to listen to the deep. It begins not with a bang, but with a series of curious beeps in the 1960s. Professor D.G. Tucker of Birmingham University arrived at the loch in 1968 with a naval sonar unit, a serious instrument for a serious inquiry. His vessel moved methodically across the water, sending pulses of sound into the darkness below. And the darkness answered. The sonar recorded large, solid objects moving independently of the boat, objects that changed depth and direction. Tucker, a cautious academic, was unequivocal. The contacts were, he stated, almost certainly animate. He estimated their length at a staggering 6 meters. Here was no floating log, no trick of the light. This was data. The following year, another researcher, Hugh Braithwaite, returned with similar equipment. He too found them. Large, unexplained sonar returns moving through the deep channel. These early sonar hits were, and remain, some of the most perplexing technical evidence in the entire Nessie archive. They were not photographs open to interpretation. They were electronic signatures of substantial mass in motion. They defied easy explanation as fish schools or debris. For the first time, technology seemed to be corroborating the eyewitnesses, suggesting that something tangible, something large, truly was down there. The hunt was no longer just about what people saw on the surface. It was about what machines could hear in the abyss. This tantalizing evidence inspired a more audacious approach. If sonar could detect an object, could a camera be triggered to photograph it? American patent lawyer and passionate believer Robert Rines aimed to find out. In 1972, and again in 1975, Rines' Academy of Applied Science expeditions mounted an underwater surveillance operation of breathtaking complexity for its time. They lowered cameras with powerful strobe lights into the deep near Urquhart Castle. It was a technological trap for a phantom. The results sent shockwaves through the world. The 1972 sequence produced an image that appeared to show a diamond-shaped flipper, large and covered in a rough texture. In 1975, another frame yielded what looked like a grotesque, gargoyle-like head and neck. These were not surface snaps. They were, proponents argued, direct images from the monster's domain. In a move that captured the technological optimism of the era, the photographs were sent to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California, where scientists used cutting-edge computer enhancement techniques developed for space exploration to clarify the images. The enhanced versions were startling. The flipper's structure seemed clearer, the head gained detail, becoming a monstrous visage. But technology giveth, and technology taketh away. The enhancement process itself later became the subject of intense criticism. The algorithms used to sharpen the blurry, low-contrast originals were designed to find patterns, to extrapolate detail from noise. Critics argued that the process had, in effect, created detail that was not present in the raw data. The gargoyle head, in its original, unenhanced form, is a vague, amorphous blob. The flipper is an indistinct shape. What the world saw was a product of interpretation, a digital Rorschach test where the desire to see a monster was built into the very software used to reveal it. The photographs, once hailed as a breakthrough, became a cautionary tale about seeing what we want to see, even through the lens of advanced technology. The quest for a definitive answer demanded scale. It demanded a sweep of the entire loch. In October of 1987, that ambition was realized. Operation Deepscan was conceived as the ultimate sonar dragnet. Organized by Adrian Shine of the Loch Ness project, it was a military-style operation of a distinctly civilian kind. 24 boats, each equipped with identical Lowrance echo sounders, formed a coordinated line across the width of the loch. For 3 days, this flotilla advanced from Loch End in the north to Fort Augustus in the south, a moving wall of acoustic pulses scanning the depths below. The world's media lined the shores, helicopters buzzed overhead. This was technology as theatre, a grand public experiment. They covered approximately 60% of the loch's immense surface area. The sonar logs filled with the mundane signatures of the deep, the loch floor, schools of fish, ancient submerged trees. And then, the anomalies. 3 times, the sweeping electronic net caught something. 3 sonar contacts, each at significant depth, each larger than any known resident of the loch. They were brief, unexplained echoes in the data stream. Adrian Shine, the operation's measured leader, described them as significant, unexplained contacts. He carefully, deliberately, refused to call them monsters. They were data points, puzzles. The operation had succeeded in its scale, but in doing so, it had simply exchanged small mysteries for a larger, more coordinated one. Technology had not dispelled the legend. It had given it a new, electronic form. The failure of Deepscan to provide a clear answer did not end the technological arms race. It accelerated it. The 1990s and 2000s brought a new generation of tools to the loch. Side-scan sonar, which painted detailed photograph-like images of the loch bed, replaced simple echo sounders. Remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, descended with their own lights and cameras, no longer waiting for a sonar trigger but actively exploring. These machines revealed the loch as never before. They mapped a submerged landscape of breathtaking drama, sheer underwater cliffs, colossal debris fields from ancient landslides, deep, soft basins of sediment. They discovered a sunken boat, a crashed Wellington bomber from World War II. What they did not find was any sign of a large, unknown animal. Yet, the loch continued to fight back with acoustic complexity. Its steep, rocky walls created confusing sonar echoes and shadows. Thermoclines, layers of water at different temperatures, could bend sound waves, creating false targets. The new technology revealed that the loch itself was a master of illusion, capable of generating phantom returns that mimicked moving objects. The investigators now had to become experts not just in biology, but in hydroacoustics, separating the signal of a potential creature from the immense noise of the loch's own geology. The most comprehensive technological assault came in 2003, mounted by the BBC. In a program titled Searching for the Loch Ness Monster, they deployed an array of 600 separate sonar beams, coupled with precise satellite navigation. It was the most detailed acoustic map of the loch ever attempted. The team systematically scanned the entire length, leaving, they argued, no place for a large animal to hide. The result was definitive in its silence. No unusual contacts were found. No large animate objects were tracked. The scientific conclusion was stark. If a breeding population of large creatures existed in Loch Ness, this technology would have found it. The loch, for all its volume, was not big enough to hide them. The believers' response to this technological null result was as predictable as it was philosophically unassailable. Perhaps the creatures were hibernating on the bottom, buried in sediment. Perhaps they inhabited underwater caves not yet discovered. Perhaps they were intelligent enough to avoid the survey boats. Each advance in technology tightened the constraints, shrinking the possible hiding places, demanding ever more elaborate biological and behavioral miracles from the hypothetical creature. Yet it could never deliver a final, definitive no. Technology could prove the presence of something anomalous, but it struggled to prove an absolute absence. The monster, it seemed, could always retreat one step further into the last refuge of the unproven, the gap in the data, the unscanned cave, the day it chose not to surface. This is the legacy of the age of technology at Loch Ness. It began with the thrilling promise of objective truth, of machines that could not lie. It gave us tantalizing sonar hits and controversial underwater photographs. It mounted operations of spectacular scale and precision. And in the end, it demonstrated not the existence of a monster, but the incredible complexity of the environment, and the enduring human capacity to find mystery in the unexplained echo. The machines listened to the deep, and the deep sent back riddles. The search had evolved from a hunt for a creature to a forensic examination of the loch's own deceptive nature, and a mirror held up to our own need for the signal to emerge from the noise. The question was no longer just what was in the water, but what was in the mind of the observer, even when that observer was a machine programmed and interpreted by human hands. This convergence of technology and belief sets the stage for the final, and perhaps most revealing, frontier of the Nessie story. Not the landscape of the loch, but the landscape of the human psyche that projects a monster onto its dark waters. The water is never still. Even on the calmest day, a breath moves across it, a tremor passes through it. It is a surface that invites projection. For 90 years, people have stood on these shores and seen their own expectations reflected back at them. They have seen monsters in the waves, legends in the mist, answers in the deep. But what if the most profound mystery of Loch Ness is not in the water at all? What if the true enigma lies within the human mind, within the intricate machinery of perception and belief that transforms a ripple into a revelation? This is not a story about a creature. It is a story about the creature within us all, the one that looks out at the unknown and cannot help but see a face staring back. We begin with a paradox. The Loch Ness Monster is one of the most studied examples of what psychologists term a persistent anomalous experience. It is a phenomenon that generates sincere, often detailed reports from credible witnesses, police officers, doctors, engineers, despite a near total absence of physical confirmation. This contradiction lies at the heart of the mystery. How can so many people be so wrong? The answer begins by dismantling a fundamental assumption that human sight is a reliable window onto reality. Research into eyewitness testimony, particularly in forensic psychology, has consistently shown that perception is a constructive act. We do not simply record the world, we assemble it, filtering raw sensory data through a lens of expectation, memory, and emotion. Conditions of poor visibility, unexpected events, and high emotional arousal are the classic catalysts for misperception. And Loch Ness is a theatre purpose, built for all three. Consider the sensory environment. The water is stained the colour of strong tea by peat, absorbing light so completely that visibility plunges to inches just below the surface. This creates a profound visual ambiguity. An object breaks the water, a seal, a log, a standing wave, but its form is instantly swallowed by the dark. The mind, presented with a fragment, instinctively tries to complete the picture. The sheer scale of the loch amplifies the effect. It is 23 miles long, a mile wide, and deeper than the North Sea. Distances are deceptive. A bird diving 100 yards away can seem, in the mind's eye, to be a massive creature submerging just offshore. Then there is the mist, the famous ha that rolls down the Great Glen, softening edges, blurring horizons, transforming the familiar into the spectral. Into this sensory soup, we must pour one final, potent ingredient: expectation. By the time a visitor arrives today, they have been immersed in the legend for a lifetime. They have seen the silhouette on postcards, the models in museums, the documentaries. They are not looking at a lake. They are looking at Loch Ness, home of the monster. The brain is primed. When the eye catches a sudden, unexplained movement in that vast dark bowl, the higher cognitive functions are bypassed. The older, more primal parts of the brain engage first. This is the limbic system, the seat of emotion and instinctual response. Its job is not philosophical contemplation. Its job is survival. It asks one rapid, urgent question: is that a threat? In the microseconds it takes for the conscious, rational mind to catch up, the subconscious has already made a suggestion, drawing from the most readily available template. On Loch Ness, that template is a long neck and a humped back. What was a wave becomes a wake. What was a bird becomes a head. The sighting report is born not from a lie, but from a genuine neurological experience. This process has a name: apophenia. It is the human tendency to perceive meaningful patterns or connections in random or meaningless data. We are pattern-seeking creatures. It is our greatest evolutionary advantage. Finding the shape of a predator in dappled forest shadows kept our ancestors alive. Seeing faces in clouds or hearing words in static is a harmless byproduct of this hyper-vigilant system. At Loch Ness, apophenia finds its perfect canvas. The visual system is exquisitely tuned to detect animal shapes, especially the silhouettes of large creatures, against ambiguous backgrounds. The loch provides a ceaseless, shifting display of ambiguous stimuli. A floating log, waterlogged and heavy, rolls ponderously in the swell. From a distance, its rhythm can mimic the slow, deliberate movement of a large animal. A group of otters swimming in a line can create a string of disturbances that reads as a single, undulating body. Diving birds like cormorants leave a distinctive surface ripple as they plunge, their long necks the perfect catalyst for the classic head and neck sighting. Even natural phenomena from the loch itself can deceive. Methane gas, released from decaying organic matter on the peat floor, can rise in large bubbles that break the surface with a surprising boil and swirl. Each of these prosaic events is a Rorschach test played out on a monumental scale. The brain, primed by legend and longing, connects the dots. It transforms random data into a coherent, living image. The critical point is this: the witness is not seeing nothing. They are seeing something genuinely unusual, something that interrupts the normal pattern of the water. The error occurs in the interpretation, in the leap from "I don't know what that is" to "I know what that must be." Apophenia provides the bridge. It turns an anomaly into an animal, a disturbance into a discovery. And with each sincere report, the cultural template grows stronger, making the next perceptual leap that much easier for the next observer. But the psychology of Loch Ness extends far beyond the individual brain on the shoreline. It is woven into the social and economic fabric of the place itself. The sociologist Robert Carroll described the monster as a cultural anchors, a shared object of belief that binds a community, gives it a unique identity, and provides a tangible sense of participating in something larger than ordinary life. Nowhere is this more visible than in the village of Drumnadrochit, the unofficial capital of Nessie's realm. Here, the creature is not a maybe, it is a fact of daily life. The economy is substantially dependent on monster tourism. Two major, competing visitor centres face each other, each offering its own narrative of the hunt. Souvenir shops overflow with plush toys, mugs, and t-shirts emblazoned with a friendly, smiling dinosaur. Hotels bear the creature's name. Tour boats promise a chance to sail the haunted depths. The monster is an industry, worth an estimated £40 million annually to the Scottish economy. This creates a powerful, self-sustaining ecosystem of belief. The economic incentive is not necessarily a conscious conspiracy to deceive. It is subtler, more pervasive. It is an environment where the legend is constantly affirmed, normalized, and celebrated. For a local business owner, a new sighting is not a scientific puzzle. It is a headline that fills hotel rooms. For a tour guide, the possibility of the monster is not a hypothesis to be tested, but a story that enthralls customers. The community has a structural interest in the legend's continuation. This shapes the information flow. Stories that support the mystery are amplified. Explanations that demystify are often met with disinterest or dismissal. The cultural anchor holds fast because so many boats are tied to it. The monster provides a shared purpose, a common language, and a viable livelihood in a remote and beautiful place. This transformation of myth into economic and social infrastructure invites a deeper psychological question. Why here? Why does this particular story have such enduring power? The psychiatrist Carl Jung offered a framework that, while not scientific in the modern sense, points to a profound human truth. Jung wrote of monsters as projections of the unconscious mind, the unknown, chaotic and powerful depths of the self made visible as an unknown creature in external physical depths. The monster, in this view, is a symbol. It gives form to our collective anxieties, our archaic memories, and our innate sense of wonder. Whether one accepts Jung's specific mythology or not, the insight resonates. The Loch Ness Monster is not merely a zoological question. It is a story we tell about the limits of our knowledge. In an age where satellites have mapped every inch of the globe and science has explained so much, the loch remains a stubborn blank spot. Its depths are literally and figuratively opaque. The monster represents the possibility that the world is still larger, stranger, and more mysterious than our instruments can measure. It is a vessel for our need for wonder. To seek it is to acknowledge that not everything can be catalogued, that mystery itself has value. This leads to the final, and perhaps most counterintuitive, psychological layer. Research into the sociology of belief communities around phenomena like Loch Ness reveals a surprising fact. Believers are not, as a group, less educated, less intelligent, or more credulous than skeptics. Examine the roll call of serious Nessie investigators. They are aeronautical engineers like Tim Dinsdale, lawyers like David James, military officers like Rupert Gould, and trained scientists who have devoted years of their lives to the search. What defines them is not a deficit of rationality, but a particular relationship with uncertainty. For the true believer, the absence of proof is not proof of absence. It is a challenge to look harder, to refine the technology, to be more patient. They share a preference for keeping the question open, for privileging the intriguing anomaly over the conclusive negative. In a different context, this is a recognizable scientific virtue. All great discoveries begin with a refusal to accept the prevailing no. The line between rigorous open-mindedness and motivated reasoning, the subconscious filtering of evidence to support a desired conclusion, is notoriously difficult to draw. It is a line that runs through the heart of every investigator who has ever stared at a fuzzy photograph or a puzzling sonar blip. The believer and the scientist both operate on faith, though of different kinds. The scientist has faith in a process, that repeated observation and testing will eventually reveal reality. The believer often has faith in an outcome, that the reality they suspect is there will eventually be revealed. At Loch Ness, these two faiths have coexisted, sometimes clashed, and often cross-pollinated for nearly a century. The psychological need for mystery meets the methodological rigor of the hunt. The result is a unique cultural artifact, a modern myth that is continually subjected to scientific scrutiny, not to kill it, but in a strange way, to validate its importance. So we are left with a mirror. The dark water of Loch Ness reflects back whatever we bring to it. Bring a predisposition for mystery, and you may see a monster. Bring a scientific instrument, and you may record an anomaly. Bring an economic need, and you will find a legend you can market. The phenomenon is a complex feedback loop between individual perception, social reinforcement, and economic incentive. It is a story that sustains itself because it fulfills a suite of deep human needs, for wonder, for community, for purpose, and for the thrill of the unsolved. The sightings will continue, the sonar will ping, the water samples will be analyzed. But perhaps the most significant finding of the last 90 years is not about the loch's ecology, but about our own psychology. We have learned how easily a wave can become a wonder. We have seen how a community can coalesce around a question mark. We have watched as a modern myth proved more durable than any flesh and blood animal could ever be. The monster, in the end, is a testament not to what might live in the deep, but to what unquestionably lives in us. A relentless, pattern-making, meaning-seeking imagination that looks into the darkness and cannot bear to see nothing there. This understanding does not diminish the legend, it deepens it. It moves the mystery from the water to the shoreline, from the depths to the human heart. And it sets the stage for the final act of our story, the scientists. For amidst the swirl of psychology and perception, a group of rigorous researchers have approached Loch Ness with a different question entirely. They came not to prove a legend, but to understand a lake. They traded monster hunting for microbiology, sonar blips for DNA sequences. Their journey, from seeking a creature to mapping an ecosystem, represents the most profound evolution in the entire saga. It is the story of how the search for a monster finally led us to the real wonder, the truth of the loch itself. The water is dark, and it holds its secrets close. For 90 years, the world has asked it a single, persistent question. And for 90 years, the loch has answered with ambiguity. With a fleeting shadow, a distant ripple, a sonar blip that vanishes into the deep. But what of those who came not with a camera or a story, but with a question? Those who arrived with the tools of science, determined to listen to the water itself, to parse its chemistry, to read the genetic whispers left behind by everything that swims within it. This is the story not of the monster, but of the search. It is the story of the scientists who went looking, and of what they found when they did. In the early 1970s, a young man arrived at the shores of Loch Ness. His name was Adrian Shine. He came, like so many before him, captivated by the possibility of the extraordinary. He was a monster hunter. He joined the long vigil, scanning the grey waters, hoping for a glimpse of the impossible. But the loch, as it does, began to work a subtle transformation. The singular question, is it there? Slowly unfurled into 1,000 others. What is here? How does this ecosystem function? What lives in this profound darkness, and how? The hunter began his metamorphosis into an ecologist. Shine's Loch Ness project became something unique, a decades-long study not of a myth, but of a place. His team mapped the loch's strange currents, its thermal layers, the peculiar way sound travels through its cold, dense water. They catalogued its life, from the microscopic plankton to the Arctic char, a living relic of the Ice Age. The monster, as a zoological entity, began to recede from the center of the inquiry. In its place grew a profound appreciation for the loch itself, a natural wonder every bit as compelling as any legend. Shine's journey is a masterclass in intellectual honesty. It is the story of what happens when you look so hard for one thing that you begin to truly see everything else. He moved from belief, through skepticism, to a nuanced understanding that the loch's greatest mystery might be its own enduring capacity to generate mystery. The search did not end, it evolved, and in 2018 it evolved into its most technologically elegant form. Professor Neil Gemmell, a geneticist from the University of Otago in New Zealand, arrived with a new kind of net. He came not with cameras or sonar, but with sterile bottles. His mission was an environmental DNA survey, a systematic census written in genetic code. Every creature in the loch sheds fragments of itself, skin cells, scales, waste. These traces are fleeting, but detectable. Collect the water, filter it, and you can extract the biological signatures of everything that has passed by. It is a way of listening to the loch's most intimate conversations. Gemmell's team spent 2 weeks gathering over 250 water samples from across the loch, from surface to depth. These vials were then dispatched to laboratories across the world for independent, blind analysis. The question was explicit: scan this genetic soup for the signature of a monster. Look for the unknown. The results were a breathtaking inventory of life. Over 5,000 species were identified from their genetic dust. They found the expected residents: salmon, trout, char, pike. They found the ubiquitous eel. They found bacteria, algae, and the DNA of visiting birds. What they did not find was a single trace of unknown reptilian DNA. No plesiosaur, no giant salamander, no creature from a forgotten age. The absence was, in scientific terms, significant. But one signal was overwhelming. The DNA of the European eel was everywhere, in remarkable abundance. The loch, it seemed, was practically paved with eels. Gemmell was cautious but clear. The data could not support a giant reptile. It could, however, be consistent with a population of very large eels. The monster hypothesis had not been proven false in an absolute sense, but its most popular form had been dealt a substantial blow. The search had, once again, refined itself. Yet, as with every technological advance in this story, the new tool brought with it new layers of complexity. The question of proof, in the dark water of Loch Ness, is a deep and shifting one. Environmental DNA is a powerful detective, but it has limitations. It can tell you what was there. It cannot tell you how big it was. The genetic fragment left by a 3-meter eel is chemically identical to that left by a 30-centimeter eel. The survey is a snapshot, not a continuous surveillance. An animal that was not in the sampled area during those 2 weeks would leave no trace. A creature whose DNA degrades unusually quickly in the cold, acidic water might evade the net. Professor Gemmell was meticulous in his phrasing. He stated the results were consistent with large eels. He did not, and could not, say they proved the monster was an eel. Science deals in probabilities, in the balance of evidence, not in certainties about singular, elusive creatures. The loch, therefore, retains a slender technical loophole. and into such loopholes legends effortlessly swim. But for the broader scientific community, the cumulative weight of evidence has long since reached a verdict. Paleontologist and science communicator Darren Naish undertook perhaps the most comprehensive audit of this evidence in his 2016 work, Hunting Monsters. He approached the legend not as a mystery, but as a series of claims to be evaluated. He examined every major photograph, every sonar anomaly, every classic eyewitness account. His conclusion was not sensational, but systematic. The totality of the evidence did not require a monster to explain it. The photographs could be explained by logs, boats, or birds. The sonar contacts could be temperature layers, fish shoals, or debris. The eyewitness accounts, overwhelmingly sincere, were classic examples of misperception under the very conditions the loch excels at providing: poor visibility, vast scale, and powerful expectation. Naish's work represents the rigorous application of scientific skepticism. It does not call people liars. Instead, it respectfully demonstrates that human perception is a creative, fallible process, especially when confronted with the ambiguous and the hoped for. The monster, in this analysis, is not an animal hiding in the water. It is a phenomenon emerging from the interaction between a specific, eerie landscape and the human mind's innate desire to populate the unknown with shape and meaning. So, after 90 years and countless investigations, what remains? If the quarry has evaporated, was the hunt in vain? The surprising, unequivocal answer is no. The scientific value of this decades-long pursuit, stripped of the monster question, is immense and enduring. Loch Ness is now one of the most intensively studied freshwater bodies on Earth. The very hunt for the impossible has yielded a profound understanding of the possible. The deep sediment cores extracted from its bed have provided a climate record spanning 10,000 years, a diary of post-glacial Scotland written in silt and pollen. The isolated populations of Arctic char have become a textbook case for studying evolution in enclosed ecosystems, showing how species adapt when trapped by geography. The relentless sonar surveys have advanced our understanding of underwater acoustics in complex terrains, knowledge applied in oceanography and defense. The monster hunt forced scientists to develop new ways to see into the dark. It pushed the limits of photography, of sonar, and finally, of genetic sampling. In striving to find the extraordinary, we became exceptionally skilled at documenting the ordinary. Adrian Shine's journey mirrors this larger truth. He began by seeking a singular anomaly and ended up creating a lasting legacy of ecological knowledge. The loch gave him a better question than the one he arrived with. The story of the scientists at Loch Ness is, therefore, a story of redirection. It is about how a captivating myth can act as a lure, drawing inquiry into a place that then reveals its true, deeper wonders. The search for Nessie has been a grand, decades-long experiment. And while the hypothesis of a giant unknown creature has not been substantiated, the experiment itself has been wildly productive. It has shown how science can engage with a public legend, test it with increasing sophistication, and emerge not with a simple yes or no, but with a richer, more complicated portrait of our world. The water remains dark, the sonar will ping again, but the legacy is now cemented, not in a carcass, but in data. In understanding. We are left with a paradox. The more thoroughly we have searched, the smaller the space for a monster has become. Yet the legend endures, undimmed. It endures because the final question was never purely biological. It was always about what the deep, dark water makes us feel and what it makes us wonder. The scientists have given us the most complete map of the loch we have ever had. But a map is not the territory of the imagination. And as we prepare to ask the ultimate question, not what is in the loch, but what we are really looking for when we gaze into it, we carry with us everything the search has taught us. Not just about water, or sonar, or eels, but about our own relentless need for mystery and the surprising, substantial rewards we reap along the way to solving it. The hunt transformed the hunters, and in doing so, it gave us a different kind of discovery altogether. The water is black. It has always been black. For 90 years we have stood on its shores, on boats, on hillsides, and stared into that darkness. We have trained cameras and sonar beams and microscopes upon it. We have asked it a single, simple question. And for 90 years, the loch has answered with the same profound, indifferent silence. Yet we keep asking. The question itself seems to have become the point. What are we really looking for when we look for the monster? The search for the Loch Ness monster is now older than most of the people who undertake it. It spans generations. A child who read the first newspaper reports in 1933 could have lived to see the sonar sweeps of the 1980s and the DNA sampling of the 2010s. This is not a fleeting mystery. It is a sustained, century-long conversation between human curiosity and a landscape that refuses to give up its secrets. The archive of that conversation is immense. It contains thousands of eyewitness accounts, hundreds of photographs, reams of sonar data, and shelves of biological surveys. And within that vast archive, there is a conspicuous, echoing absence. No physical specimen has ever been recovered. No body has washed ashore. No bone, no scale, no tooth has been found in the peat or the silt. In a loch that has been trawled, dredged, and scanned, the complete lack of any tangible remains is, in itself, a powerful piece of data. The photographs that once seemed so definitive have, one by one, retreated under scrutiny. Some were honest mistakes of light and perception. Others were deliberate fictions. None withstand the cold, hard light of forensic analysis. The sonar contacts, those tantalizing blips in the deep, have never been tracked to a visible surface object. They remain anomalies in the data, unexplained but also unverified. The Environmental DNA Survey, the most comprehensive biological audit ever conducted, found no trace of an unknown, large reptile or fish. It found eels in abundance. It found the genetic signature of every creature that calls the loch home. It did not find a monster. By the conventional standards of zoology, of evidence, of proof, the case has not been made. The verdict of science, after 90 years, is a quiet but firm negative. And yet, the sightings continue. The reports still come in. Every year, new witnesses describe their encounter with something they cannot explain. The legend does not wither in the face of negative evidence. It grows, it adapts, it becomes more intricate, more resilient. This is the central paradox of Loch Ness. The less evidence we find, the more powerfully the story endures. It suggests we are measuring the phenomenon with the wrong tools. We are asking a biological question of something that has long since ceased to be merely biological. The infrastructure built around the monster is now a self-sustaining ecosystem. It has its own economy, its own geography, its own rituals. Loch Ness receives around 400,000 visitors each year. The vast majority come because of the story. They board the tour boats named Nessie Hunter and Deepscan. They browse the souvenir shops filled with plush toys and mugs. They choose between the two competing visitor centres in Drumnadrochit, each offering its own version of the truth. This is not a fringe economy. It is a central pillar of the local world. The Scottish tourism industry, the village, the boat operators, the manufacturers, they all have a structural interest in the legend's continuation. This does not mean the legend is false, but it does mean the ground upon which it stands is not neutral. The need for the monster is real, even if the monster itself is not. It provides jobs, it sustains communities. It draws people from across the globe to this specific, beautiful and remote part of Scotland. The creature has become a currency, a brand, a reason for being. The search is no longer just a search, it is an industry. This commercial reality creates a powerful, often unconscious, incentive to keep the question alive. To never quite close the book, a definitive answer, a final, conclusive no, would be an economic catastrophe. So the space for doubt is carefully maintained. The unexplained sonar contact, the blurry photograph, the sincere eyewitness, they are not just pieces of evidence. They are assets. They are the lifeblood of a story that has become essential. The monster has escaped the loch and now lives in the economy, in the culture, in the collective imagination. It is far easier to merchandise a mystery than a solution. The phenomenon belongs to a broader family. Loch Ness is not alone. It is kin to the forests where Bigfoot is said to walk, to the Himalayan peaks that may hide the Yeti, to the Congo Basin rivers whispered to hold Mokele Membe. These are the cryptids. Their legends share a common architecture, credible witnesses, ambiguous physical traces. Decades of investigation yielding no definitive proof. And a community of belief that persists, stubbornly, joyfully, in the face of all negative results. What binds these stories together is not evidence, but a shared promise. They promise a world that is still wild. A world where not everything is catalogued, not every shadow is explained, not every corner of the map is filled in. In an age of satellites and search engines, this promise is incredibly potent. The cryptid legend is a rebellion against the known. It is a declaration that mystery can still exist, right here on the edges of our modern world. It is a form of secular hope. These stories are containers for our longing for the extraordinary. We want to believe that the world is larger, stranger, and more magical than our science textbooks suggest. The monster is the vehicle for that want. It is less important what the monster is than what it represents, the possibility of wonder. The chance that, just maybe, the next turn in the road, the next glance at the water, could change everything we think we know. This is a powerful, deeply human need, and Loch Ness has become one of its primary sanctuaries. Within Scotland itself, the relationship with the monster is beautifully, painfully complex. For many Scots, Nessie is a source of both pride and profound embarrassment. It is a piece of global cultural identity, instantly recognizable. It puts this place on the map. Yet that same identity is often reduced to a cartoon, a cliché, a piece of tourist kitsch. The deep, sophisticated mythology of the Highlands can feel drowned out by the repetitive boom of the monster hunt. Long before there was a monster, there were water spirits. The Gaelic folklore of the Highlands is saturated with them. The Ichuish, the deadly water horse that lures riders to a drowning fate. The Kelpie, the shape-shifting spirit of rivers and lochs. These were not animals to be discovered, but forces to be respected. They were expressions of the land's power and danger, woven into stories that taught caution, reverence, and an understanding of humanity's small place in a vast, animate world. The Nessie narrative, with its focus on zoology and photography, has largely obscured this deeper, darker, and more poetic tradition. It has replaced a mystical relationship with a forensic one. Recovering that older wisdom is perhaps the most valuable cultural task the Nessie phenomenon makes possible. It invites us to look past the plesiosaur plush toy and remember the each huishje. To listen for the older stories whispering beneath the engine noise of the tour boats, the loch was never empty. It was always full of meaning. So where does this leave us after 90 years? With the most honest conclusion, which is also the most generative one. We do not know what people have seen in Loch Ness. We know that many sightings have mundane explanations: a wave, a log, a bird, a trick of the light. We know that several famous photographs were frauds. We know that our most sensitive instruments have detected no large, unknown animal. This is the weight of evidence. But we also know this. The loch is genuinely extraordinary. It is deeper than the North Sea. Its cold, dark waters hold life forms that are relics of the Ice Age. Its ecosystem is still not fully understood. The history of science is, in fact, a history of legends becoming real. The giant squid was a sailor's myth until its carcasses began to wash ashore. The coelacanth was a fossil, extinct for millions of years, until one was hauled alive from the Indian Ocean. The okapi was a rumor in the Congo until it was classified. The loch keeps its secrets not because it is supernatural, but because it is profoundly, overwhelmingly natural. It is deep. It is dark. It is complex. And it is indifferent. It does not care about our cameras, our theories, or our desperate need for a conclusive answer. That indifference is perhaps the most honest thing about it. The mystery persists not in spite of the evidence, but because of the landscape itself. The loch is a perfect vessel for wonder. The search, then, becomes its own reward. It brings scientists to study its unique ecology. It draws artists and writers to its shores. It forces us to question our own perception, our psychology, our hunger for narrative. The monster is the lure, but the loch is the lesson. It teaches us about the limits of knowledge. It reminds us that some questions are not meant to be answered, only asked, again and again, across generations. What we are really looking for, when we look for the monster, is not a creature. We are looking for a connection to a wilder past, to a sense of shared mystery, to a landscape that can still surprise us. We are looking for permission to wonder. In a world that often feels explained, mapped, and measured, Loch Ness remains a blank space on the psychological map. A place where the imagination can still swim in the deep. The story will outlive us all. Long after the current theories are forgotten, people will stand on these shores. They will peer into the black water. They will feel that same ancient pull. They will see a ripple, a shadow, a shape that does not quite fit. And they will wonder. The monster is not in the water. It is in the act of looking. It is in the space between what it is, the shape we give to our own curiosity. So let the searches continue. Let the sonar ping. Let the DNA be sequenced. Each investigation, whether it finds a monster or finds only more mystery, adds another layer to the story. It deepens our understanding of this place, and in doing so, deepens the legend itself. The loch and the legend are now inseparable. One is a body of water, ancient and cold. The other is a body of stories, ever-growing, ever-changing, and endlessly alive. We began with a question asked into the darkness. We end not with an answer, but with a recognition. The value of Loch Ness was never contingent on the existence of a monster. Its value is in the questions it compels us to ask, about nature, about perception, about the stories we need to tell ourselves to feel at home in a mysterious world. The water is black. It will always be black. And we will always stand at its edge, looking, hoping, and wondering what lies beneath. The water is black. It is not the black of ink or of night, but the black of deep things, of cold things, of things that have never known light. It lies perfectly still between the shoulders of the hills, a sheet of obsidian laid into the earth. There is no wind. The air smells of wet stone and peat, and a profound, patient silence. The sky is a bruised purple, the last stars fading like distant pinholes. The world is holding its breath. The loch is not. The loch is simply being. It is a presence so vast and so complete it feels like an absence. It is the nothing that comes before everything else. A single figure stands at the edge where land surrenders to water. Her boots are sunk to the ankle in a thick, sucking mud that is the colour of old tea. She does not move. She is a silhouette against the greater darkness of the loch, her shape a still and weathered punctuation mark on the shoreline. Her hands are deep in the pockets of a waxed coat. Her breath does not plume, the air is too cold and too still for that. She is watching the water do what it has always done, nothing, not nothing as an absence, nothing as a completeness. The loch is entire, it is indifferent, it contains only itself. The mud that holds her boots is the same mud. This is the fact she returns to, the anchor in the quiet, the same mineral-rich ice-age silt, the same cold seep. Her grandmother's boots sank here, her great-grandmother's. The mud remembers every footprint, accepts everyone, and then forgets, smoothing itself back into a blank page with the next gentle lap of water. The loch does not change, the stories change, the people who come to tell them change. But the water is the same cold, dark, and silent water it was 1,000 years ago. It offers no shape, no hint of movement beneath. It is a surface, and that is all it has ever promised to be. The light begins its slow turn, not from the east but from everywhere at once, a dilution of the dark from black to deep grey. The hills separate themselves from the sky, becoming solid masses. The water loses its mirror finish, becoming a matte, depthless sheet. A single bird calls from across the loch, a sound so sharp it seems to crack the silence, but the silence immediately repairs itself, swallowing the echo whole. She feels the cold now, a precise ache in her knuckles, a tightness across her shoulders. It is a familiar cold, a loch cold, that smells of iron and deep water. It is the smell of home. 73 years earlier, in a farmhouse a quarter-mile from this southern shore, Morag McAllister is born into the smell of peat smoke and wet wool. The house is stone, low to the ground, its windows small against the weather. From her cradle she can hear the loch. Not a sound, but a presence, a low pressure in the air, a silence that has weight. Her grandmother, Ishbel, is a woman of the water. Her hands are mapped with fine, pale scars from fishing lines and gutting knives. She walks to the bank not to wander, but to work. The loch is a larder. Its cold depths hold brown trout and Arctic char. Its banks yield reeds for thatching, and a particular moss her grandmother uses for poultices. Her father, Alistair, cuts peat from the boggy land where the hillside meets the water. In autumn, the family works together, stacking the dark, fragrant bricks to dry. The loch is a boundary line, the end of their grazing land, the beginning of something too deep and too cold to be of use. In the worst winters, it freezes hard at the edges, a jagged, milky white fringe that creaks and groans. In the thaw, it gives off a smell of cold iron, as if the water is leaching the very blood from the ancient rock below. The village of Drumnadrochit is not a destination. It is a collection of roofs where people live. The road is a single track of rutted dirt and gravel. The tourists are almost none. Morag's childhood is measured in loch light. The flat, grey light of a rainy afternoon, when the water and sky merge into one seamless, damp entity. The startling, silver-bright light that follows a storm, when every pine needle on the far shore is picked out in sharp relief. The long, golden light of a summer evening that turns the surface to hammered bronze, and stretches their shadows far across the bank. She learns to read the water not for monsters, but for weather. A particular choppy charcoal grey means a western gale will arrive by supper. A strange, greenish cast to the waves at midday foretells heavy rain. The loch speaks, but only of practical things. She follows her grandmother to the water's edge, carrying the willow creel. Ishbel moves with a slow, deliberate economy, her eyes scanning the surface not for a neck or a hump, but for the subtle, dimpling rise of a fish, for the skittering flight of insects that will tell her where to cast. She teaches Morag how to mend a net, how to clean a catch so nothing is wasted, how to listen to the loch's moods. The stories she tells are not of giants or serpents, but of the winter the ice was so thick they could walk across to Urquhart, of the summer the char ran so thick you could almost scoop them with your hands. The farmhouse is a world of its own. The walls are 2 feet thick. The wind moans in the chimney but cannot find a way inside. At night, with the lamps extinguished, the dark is absolute, and the silence is filled with the loch's deep, sub-audible hum, a vibration felt in the bones more than heard. Morag falls asleep to that hum. It is the sound of everything being as it should be. The world is the farm, the hill, the village, and the great, dark, useful water. It is a complete and sufficient world. There is no room in it for fantasy, and no need for it. The real is miraculous enough. The year 1933 arrives not as a date on a calendar, but as a change in the weather of other people's minds. It comes up the road in the form of a newspaper, brought by the postman on his bicycle. It is a Tuesday. The kitchen is warm with the smell of baking bread. Ishbel sits at the table, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She unfolds the Inverness Courier. Her hands, usually so steady, develop a slight tremor. She reads. She does not speak. Morag, now a girl of 7, watches from the hearthrug. She sees her grandmother's face undergo a subtle transformation. It is not surprise. It is not disbelief. It is something that settles into the lines around her mouth and eyes like a fine, cold ash. It is a kind of grief. The article speaks of a monstrous fish, a strange creature, a sighting by a respectable couple on the new AAT2 road. It uses words like prehistoric and unknown. It describes a loch of mystery, of hidden depths, of secrets waiting to be unveiled. Ishbel finishes reading and lays the paper flat on the table. She looks out the small window, across the field to where a sliver of the loch is visible, its surface grey and ordinary under a flat sky. The loch they are describing in the paper is not the loch outside the window. It is a different creature altogether. A loud, sensational, fictional thing. And yet, from this moment forward, that other loch, the invented one, the monstrous one, will begin its long, slow work of crowding the real one out. The name spreads like weather. Nessie. It is in the papers from London, then the radio broadcasts. It is a word that feels silly in the mouth, a nickname for something that does not exist. Tourists begin to appear. Not many at first. A motor car or two on a weekend. Strangers in city clothes standing at the shoreline with binoculars, peering intently at the empty water. They look foolish to Morag. They look like people waiting for a train that will never come. Her father, Alistair, tips his cap to them, a gesture of polite distance. Her grandmother stops going to the main bank in the afternoons. She takes her fishing rod to a smaller, hidden inlet further down, a place the new road cannot see. Life in the farmhouse continues, but a new sound has entered the world. The distant, irregular putter of automobile engines, the crunch of tires on the gravel track that is slowly being improved. The real work of the loch continues too. The fish are still caught. The peat is still cut. The weather is still red from the water's face. But now there is a parallel world growing alongside it, a world of speculation and excitement that has nothing to do with the taste of trout fried in oatmeal or the ache in your back from stacking peat. This new world is made of paper and ink and eager, credulous talk. It pays nothing, yet it demands everything. Morag is 12 when the turn comes. It does not come with a bang, but with a quiet click. It is the sound of a camera shutter. A visitor centre, little more than a wooden hut, has been built in a field near Urquhart Castle. A car park of sorts has been trampled into the grass. Morag stands at the edge of this car park, her arms crossed against the chill. A man from London is setting up a large camera on a tripod. He is dressed in a tweed jacket that looks too thin for the climate. He is not looking at the loch. He is looking through his viewfinder, adjusting dials with brisk, impatient fingers. He points his camera at the water, at the particular stretch where the deep channel runs close to the shore. He is waiting. Morag understands, with a clarity that feels like a physical chill, what he is waiting for. He is waiting for the loch to perform. He is waiting for it to become the thing from the newspapers. He does not see the water for what it is, a cold, deep, living entity with its own rhythms and moods. He sees it as a stage, an empty set awaiting its star. And in that moment, Morag understands that the loch now has two lives. The one it lives and the one it is expected to live. Her family, her history, her knowledge belong to the first life. The man with she walks home along the sheep path, her feet finding the familiar grooves in the turf. The understanding settles into her, heavy as a stone in her pocket. The first life does not pay. The second life will. It is a simple, brutal equation. At home, her mother is kneading dough. Her father is repairing a harness. They do not ask what she saw. They already know. The silence in the kitchen is different now. It is the silence of a calculation being made, of a line being approached, not with anger, but with a weary, practical resignation. The world has changed the rules of their home, and they must learn to play, or be left behind on the empty, unprofitable shore. The cost is not dramatic. There is no single moment of loss. It is incremental, domestic, and therefore harder to mourn, like watching the light fade on a winter afternoon. The farmhouse becomes a bed and breakfast. The parlour, once a place for family and the rare neighbourly visit, is filled with a stranger's floral-patterned sofa and a small writing desk for postcards. The smell of peat smoke is now joined by the smell of commercial soap and toast made for people who will leave after 2 nights. Alistair McAllister learns to answer questions about Nessie. He develops a short, rehearsed speech about the loch's depth, the possibility of caves, the strange currents. His voice is even. His patience is not patience, it is economic necessity wearing patience's face. The village fills. Not with more families, but with more shops. A gift shop selling tiny carved monsters on keyrings. Another selling postcards with artists' impressions of a plesiosaur in cartoonish greens and purples. A tea room with Nessie-shaped shortbread. The real work of the village. The farming, the minor forestry, the fishing continues, but it moves into the background, becomes something done early in the morning or late at night, something that happens out of sight. The new work is service, is smiling, is selling a story. Morag, now a teenager working in the tea room, watches her mother take a shilling from a man wearing a jumper with a knitted Nessie on the front. Her mother says thank you. She means it. The money is real. The monster on the man's chest, and the one he hopes to see in the water, is not. The real loch, the cold one, the silent one, the one that belongs to no story, retreats. It becomes a private thing, a secret held by those who knew it before. Morag finds she can only visit it in the hours before dawn, or in the deep of winter when the tourists are gone, and the gales scream down the length of the water, keeping everyone indoors. Then, it is hers again. Then, the water is just water, the wind is just wind, and the only sound is the ancient, grinding protest of ice at the edges, or the slap of waves against rock. These moments are stolen, and their sweetness is laced with a new bitterness, the knowledge that they are stolen, that her birthright has become a hiding place. She does not leave. This is her resolution, and it is not a triumphant one. It is not a stand, not a protest. It is a deeper, quieter form of stubbornness. She stays because the water is still there, beneath the myth. The bedrock has not changed. The deep, cold taste of the air has not changed. The way the mist hangs in the corries of the hills in autumn has not changed. The monster is a story painted on the surface, like the gaudy reflection of a gift shop sign. But the loch beneath is unchanged, unmoved, uninterested. She will outweight the story. She will anchor herself to the real. The decades turn. She outlasts 3 distinct waves of monster fever. The first, the newspaper frenzy of the 30s. The second, the grainy photograph and sonar expedition fever of the 60s. The third, the television documentary and cryptozoology boom of the 90s. She outlasts 2 documentary crews that film in her B&B, asking her leading questions about local lore. She serves tea to a famous American explorer who spends a week on a boat with submersible cameras. He finds nothing but mud and cold water. He leaves looking disappointed, and the village's economy dips for a season. She watches the slow conversion of every stone building in Drum the Drocket. The butcher becomes a Nessie experience. The old smithy becomes a pub called the Dinosaur's Arms. The real becomes a costume the past wears for profit. Through it all, she keeps her morning ritual. Before the first coach rumbles over the bridge from Inverness, she is awake. She pulls on the same boots, the same coat. She walks the same path, now bordered by a proper car park and a safety railing, but she steps over the railing down onto the untamed bank where the mud is still thick. She stands in the same spot. The water is different every day and exactly the same. Some mornings it is choppy and angry, slapping the stones. Some mornings it is still as death, a perfect duplicate of the sky. Some mornings it is shrouded in a mist so thick she can only hear it, a gentle lapping presence in the white. The loch gives her the same answer it always has, which is no answer, which is the whole point. It offers its surface and nothing more. It does not reassure, it does not confess, it does not perform, it simply is. The legend is loud. It is on t-shirts and in video games and in the excited chatter of children dragged from the coaches. The loch is quiet. Its silence is not a mystery to be solved. It is a fact to be accepted, a depth to be respected. In a world that screams for meaning, for spectacle, for a story with a happy ending or a terrifying monster, the loch's quiet refusal is the most radical truth Morag knows. She has chosen the quiet. Now, at 73, the ritual is the spine of her life, the same woman, the same boots, the same mud. The light is coming up, a thin line of gold etching the eastern hills. Behind her, a mile down the road, the first coach of the day is already turning off the A82, its air brakes hissing. It will disgorge 50 people who will buy coffee and postcards and scan the water with hopeful, phone-held eyes. She does not turn to look. Her gaze is fixed on the water in front of her. As the sun breaches the hill, a transformation occurs. For just a few seconds, the black sheet of water catches the direct, low light. It does not sparkle. It turns to molten silver, a solid, gleaming path laid from her feet to the far shore. Then the light rises, softens, diffuses. The silver fades to a dull, beautiful grey. And then it is just water again, rippled, dark, ordinary water. The moment passes. But she was here for it. Her grandmother saw this exact transformation, standing in this same mud. Her grandmother's grandmother saw it, watching for fish, not for magic. This daily miracle of light on deep water has never been captured on a postcard, never featured in a documentary, never been part of the story the world tells about this place. It is too simple, too real. It requires no belief, only presence. She takes a deep breath, filling her lungs with the cold, iron-scented air. The ache in her knees is familiar. The weight of her years is a comfortable coat. She has stood sentinel for the real thing. She has been a keeper of the quiet. The coach will unload. The shops will open. The great machine of the myth will clatter into motion for another day. It will paint its stories on the surface of her home. But she knows, and the loch knows, that it is only paint. It washes off. It fades. The water beneath remains, black and still and entirely indifferent to what the world has decided it contains. It is complete. It is nothing. It is everything. She pulls one boot, then the other, from the mud with a soft, sucking sigh. She turns her back on the water. The path up the bank is worn smooth by her own footsteps, a private trail. She does not look towards the village, where the first neon sign flickers on in a cafe window. She looks at the ground, at the grass beaded with dew, at the honest earth. She walks slowly, the loch at her back, a silent witness receding into the morning. The water is black. It is not the black of ink or of night, but the black of deep things, of cold things, of things that have always been, and will always be, themselves.
That's adorable. Let's try the peace sign.